Some dogs forget pain. The dangerous ones remember everything. Rain drifted sideways across Highway 17 just north of Thunder Bay, turning the asphalt silver beneath the dim wash of streetlights. The November wind carried the scent of wet pine, diesel, and distant lake water rolling off Superior like cold breath through the dark. At nearly 11:30 at night, traffic had thinned to almost nothing. Only the occasional transport truck thundered past, spraying mist across the shoulder before vanishing into the black northern highway. Officer Nathan Mercer leaned back inside his cruiser near a deserted fuel station, one gloved hand resting near the radio clipped to his vest. He had spent nearly 19 years with Ontario Provincial Police, long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary silence and the kind that warned you something was wrong. Tonight felt wrong. The station ahead had been abandoned for months. Windows boarded. Pumps wrapped in yellow tape fluttering weakly in the wind. Yet dispatch had received 3 separate calls reporting movement near the property. Nathan killed the engine and stepped out slowly, boots crunching over thin frost gathering along the gravel shoulder. His breath curled pale in front of him. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged softly against metal. Then silence again. His flashlight swept across the station lot. Broken signage. Empty barrels. Rainwater dripping from rusted eaves. And then he saw it. A shape near the edge of the loading area beside an overturned snowplow attachment. Large. Black. Motionless. Nathan moved carefully, instinct tightening in his chest. At first he thought it was a deer struck by traffic. Then the shape shifted slightly. A dog. Lean. Black and rust-colored beneath the rain. A Doberman. The animal lay partially curled against the concrete barrier, one foreleg trembling faintly. Its coat was soaked through, ribs visible beneath slick fur. No collar. No tags. One ear nicked from an old injury. The dog lifted its head weakly as Nathan approached, amber eyes catching the flashlight beam with startling focus. Not panic. Not confusion. Calculation. Nathan crouched slowly, lowering the light. Easy there, buddy. The Doberman's breathing quickened. For 1 second, Nathan noticed fear flash across its eyes. But then something stranger happened. The dog shifted its body despite obvious pain and positioned itself sideways between Nathan and the darkness behind the fuel station. A tactical angle. Protective coverage. Nathan froze. The animal's eyes never left the shadows. Beyond the pumps. Its ears twitched toward the back alley entrance beside the garage bay. Then came the low sound. Not a growl. A warning vibration deep in the chest. Controlled. Intentional. Nathan felt the hairs rise along the back of his neck. No, he murmured quietly. That's not stray behavior. The rain intensified, drumming softly against the cruiser behind him. Nathan reached slowly toward the dog's shoulder. The Doberman flinched but did not snap. Instead, its gaze locked briefly onto the holstered sidearm at Nathan's hip before scanning the perimeter again. Working. Even injured, the animal was still assessing threats. Nathan had seen it before. Kandahar-trained military dogs. RCMP tactical K-9 units. Animals conditioned to monitor movement before their own survival. But this dog had no identification. No visible handler. No record. Somewhere in the darkness behind the station, a loose chain rattled once against metal. The Doberman reacted instantly. Despite exhaustion, it attempted to rise. Its paws slipped against the wet pavement before collapsing again with a strained breath. Nathan turned sharply toward the sound, hand moving near his radio. "Dispatch," he said quietly, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the fuel pumps. "I may need backup out on Highway 17. And, send animal services too." His voice paused. The Doberman stared into the darkness beside him like it recognized someone the world had forgotten. Nathan looked down at the trembling animal one more time. Then the thought hit him hard enough to stop his breathing for a second. Who trained you? The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of Thunder Bay beneath a halo of pale fluorescent light, its windows blurred by freezing rain and drifting fog off the harbor. Nathan carried the Doberman through the front doors wrapped inside an old wool emergency blanket from the cruiser trunk. The dog was heavier than it looked, close to 40 kilograms of trembling muscle and exhaustion, yet even half-conscious it kept lifting its head toward every sound in the building. The receptionist rose from her chair immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered softly. "What happened to him?" Nathan laid the Doberman carefully onto the examination mat while warm air hummed through ceiling vents overhead. The scent of antiseptic mixed with wet fur and melting snow filled the room. "Found him near an abandoned station off Highway 17, Nathan said quietly. "Looks like exposure, maybe clipped by a vehicle earlier. Tonight. But there's something else." Before the receptionist could ask, the Doberman's eyes snapped toward the hallway leading to the rear exit. A young veterinary assistant stepped through carrying metal instruments, and the dog instantly tracked the movement without moving its body. Calm. Methodical. Like it had mapped the room already. Dr. Claire Beaumont entered moments later, pulling her reading glasses into place as she approached the table. She was in her late 40s, tall, silver strands woven through dark hair tied behind her neck, with the steady posture of someone used to handling frightened animals and grieving people at the same time. "Easy now," she murmured softly as she reached toward the dog's shoulder. The Doberman stiffened immediately. Not aggressive. Alert. Nathan noticed the exact moment it happened. The dog's gaze dropped to Claire's right hand where a small set of surgical scissors reflected under the overhead lights. Its breathing changed. Slower. Focused. "He's assessing tools," Nathan said quietly. Claire glanced at him. "Excuse me?" Nathan shook his head slightly. "Nothing." The Doberman suddenly shifted despite visible pain and angled its body toward the clinic entrance. Covering the room again. Nathan felt unease settle deeper into his chest. Claire began examining the animal carefully, fingers moving gently along the ribcage and foreleg. "Minor fracture," she said softly. "Bruising. Severe exhaustion. Malnourished, too. But whoever trained this dog taught him discipline." Nathan looked up sharply. "You see it too?" Claire nodded faintly. "Most strays panic under stress. This one monitors exits." The rain rattled harder against the windows. Somewhere beyond the treatment room, a police radio crackled from Nathan's vest. The reaction was immediate. The Doberman's ears lifted. Its head turned directly toward the sound. Then, despite exhaustion, the dog attempted to rise onto its front legs. Nathan stared. "No way." Claire steadied the animal gently. "Easy." But Nathan's pulse had already quickened. Slowly, carefully, he crouched near the examination table. His voice dropped lower, instinct taking over before thought could stop it. "Hold perimeter." The room went silent. For half a second nothing happened. Then the Doberman dragged itself painfully toward the clinic doorway. One step. Another. It positioned itself beside the entrance with a clear line of sight to both the front lobby and rear hallway before finally collapsing again onto the tile floor. Claire froze completely. The receptionist whispered something under her breath. Nathan could not speak. Because that command was obsolete. RCMP tactical handlers stopped using it nearly 11 years earlier after command restructuring changed K-9 protocols nationwide. Most officers under 40 had never even heard the phrase. Yet this dog responded instantly. Like memory had awakened before survival did. The Doberman lifted its head weakly and looked directly at Nathan for the first time since the highway. Not like an animal seeing a stranger. Like an officer recognizing another officer. Then Nathan noticed something else beneath the wet fur near the dog's left shoulder. A faint scar. Small. Circular. Too precise to be accidental. His stomach tightened. He had seen marks like that before during joint training exercises years ago outside Ottawa. Identification implants. Government issue. Claire followed his stare. What is it? Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the Doberman. I think somebody tried very hard to erase where this dog came from. The storm eased sometime after midnight, but the cold settled deeper across Thunder Bay like a weight pressing against the windows of the clinic. Outside, slush gathered along the curbs beneath flickering streetlights while snow drifted quietly over the empty harbor roads. Inside the examination room, the Doberman finally slept for the first time since Nathan had found him near the abandoned station. Not deeply. Never fully relaxed. Even resting, one ear twitched toward every sound in the building. Nathan sat alone beside the treatment room window with a paper cup of burnt coffee cooling in his hands. The overhead fluorescent lights painted everything pale blue and tired. He should have gone home hours ago. Instead, he kept staring at the sleeping dog like memory itself was lying on that examination floor. Dr. Claire Beaumont returned carrying a tablet and a folded towel. No microchip registered through civilian databases, she said quietly. No tattoo records either. At least not public ones. Nathan nodded faintly but said nothing. Claire studied him for a moment before setting the tablet down beside him. You know something. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Maybe. The rainwater still drying on his jacket smelled faintly of road salt and wet wool. For several seconds only the distant hum of ventilation filled the room. Then Nathan finally leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the Doberman. About 12 years ago I attended a joint tactical seminar outside Ottawa, he said quietly. Ontario Provincial Police. Royal Canadian. Mounted Police. Border Enforcement. K-9 divisions. Mostly routine training. His jaw tightened slightly. But there were rumors. Claire folded her arms gently. What kind of rumors? Nathan hesitated. The Doberman shifted slightly in his sleep, paws twitching once against the blanket. Experimental dogs, he said softly. Off-record units trained beyond standard patrol work. Smuggling interdiction. High-risk tracking. Behavioral conditioning. Claire frowned faintly. Military? Nathan shook his head. Not officially. The clinic lights reflected dimly across the window glass behind him. Snowflakes drifted sideways beyond the parking lot like ash moving through darkness. Most officers thought it was nonsense, Nathan continued. Stories people told after too many night shifts. But once during a demonstration I saw one of those dogs react before the handler even gave a verbal command. The animal read body language before speech. His eyes lowered toward the sleeping Doberman. Exactly like him. Claire glanced at the faint scar near the dog's shoulder. And the implant mark? Nathan nodded slowly. Government issue. Older generation tracking hardware probably removed years ago. Claire's expression darkened slightly. Removed by who? Nathan did not answer immediately because the truth forming in his mind felt heavier than the storm outside. Somebody had not abandoned this dog. Somebody had erased him. The room fell silent again until a soft metallic sound echoed from the hallway outside the treatment room. The Doberman's eyes opened instantly. No confusion. No grogginess. Awake in less than a second. Nathan felt his pulse rise again. The dog did not bark. It simply stared toward the doorway with complete focus. Then the veterinary assistant appeared carrying fresh bandages. The Doberman relaxed slightly, though its gaze continued tracking every movement she made across the room. Claire whispered under her breath, almost to herself. He watches hands first. Nathan noticed it too. The dog never focused on faces first. Always hands. Training. Survival. Memory. The assistant finished replacing supplies and left quietly. As the hallway door swung shut again, the Doberman's eyes followed the motion until the latch clicked fully closed. Only then did the animal rest its head back onto the blanket. Nathan stared for several long seconds before speaking again. "There was one handler at that seminar," he said quietly. "Corporal Liam Harlow. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Tactical K-9 Unit." Claire listened carefully. Nathan rubbed tired fingers along his jaw. "He had a Doberman unlike anything I had ever seen. Fast. Disciplined. Silent. The dog could clear obstacle drills almost before commands were spoken." His voice lowered further. "The dog's name was Vesper." Claire looked toward the sleeping animal. "You think this is the same dog?" Nathan swallowed once. "I think it is impossible." Then the Doberman slowly lifted its head at the sound of the name. Amber eyes locked directly onto Nathan across the dim room. And for the first time all night, the dog's tail moved once against the floor. Snow began falling properly just after 2 in the morning, thick northern flakes drifting past the clinic windows and muting the city beyond into pale silence. Thunder Bay looked softer under snowfall, almost peaceful, but Nathan Mercer had spent too many years working night patrols to trust quiet weather. Sometimes silence only meant trouble had not reached you yet. The Doberman remained awake now, resting on folded blankets beside the examination table while warm air hissed softly through the vents overhead. The animal no longer trembled from cold, yet tension still lived in every line of its body. Even lying down, Vesper kept the clinic entrance within view. Nathan sat nearby scrolling through old records on his mobile computer while Dr. Claire Beaumont reviewed medical scans at the counter behind him. Most of the databases returned nothing useful. No public registration. No ownership records. No missing canine reports matching the Doberman's age or markings. It was as though the dog had simply appeared out of nowhere sometime in the last decade. But Nathan knew better. Systems do not erase living things unless somebody powerful requests it. The overhead lights flickered once as wind rattled against the building. Nathan rubbed his tired eyes and reopened an archived policing forum he had not touched in years. Most of the discussion threads were long deleted, but one partially preserved post still remained buried deep inside an inactive tactical training board. Cerberus Initiative. Restricted Behavioral Conditioning Unit. Access removed. Nathan stared at the words while cold moved slowly through his chest. Claire looked over from across the room. "You found something?" He nodded faintly. "Not enough." Before he could continue, headlights swept briefly across the clinic windows from outside. Vesper reacted instantly. The Doberman rose onto his front legs despite obvious pain, posture rigid, eyes fixed toward the parking lot entrance. Nathan stood immediately. A dark sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past the clinic without stopping. Black paint. Snow-covered plates. Tinted windows. The engine noise faded into the storm moments later. But Vesper did not relax. His breathing had changed again. Faster now. Uneasy. Nathan walked toward the front blinds carefully and peered through a narrow gap toward the street. Empty road. Falling snow. Nothing else. Yet instinct whispered the same warning that had followed him since the abandoned station. Someone else knew about this dog. Behind him Claire spoke quietly. He recognized that vehicle. Nathan looked back toward the Doberman. Vesper had retreated partially behind the examination table now, not out of fear exactly, but caution. Tactical repositioning. Creating visual coverage while limiting exposure. Nathan had seen officers do the same thing entering uncertain scenes during raids. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Dogs do not behave like that naturally, Claire whispered. Nathan nodded once. No. They learn it. The clinic fell quiet again except for the distant hum of snowfall brushing against the windows. Then Nathan remembered something else from Ottawa 12 years earlier. A briefing room. Low voices. A handler mentioning that Cerberus dogs were not only trained for detection. They were conditioned for memory retention through scent association. Better than cameras. Better than witnesses. Because dogs remember fear differently than humans do. Nathan slowly crouched near Vesper again. "Hey," he said softly. "Easy." The Doberman's eyes lifted toward him, wary but steady. Nathan studied the scars along the dog's shoulder and neck more carefully under the examination light. Most were old. Faded. One small mark near the collarbone caught his attention though. A thin pale line hidden beneath short fur. Surgical. Deliberate. Claire stepped closer beside him. "What is it?" Nathan reached carefully without startling the dog and parted the fur gently. Beneath the scar sat a tiny faded tattoo no larger than a coin. A symbol. 3 black triangular shapes surrounding a single vertical line. Claire frowned. "Military?" Nathan's expression hardened slowly. "No," he stared at the symbol for several long seconds before recognition finally settled into place like ice locking over dark water. He had seen the emblem once before on confidential briefing documents connected to border trafficking investigations nearly a decade ago. Cases that disappeared suddenly. Officers transferred without explanation. Evidence sealed. Nathan looked back at Vesper as snow whispered against the clinic roof overhead. This dog was never supposed to be found. By 4:30 in the morning the storm had buried most of Thunder Bay beneath nearly 15 centimeters of fresh snow, softening rooftops and swallowing the sound of distant traffic beneath a blanket of white silence. Inside the clinic, the lights remained low except for the treatment area where Nathan sat alone reviewing archived files that should not have still existed. Most had been partially deleted years earlier. Names blacked out. Entire pages missing. Yet fragments remained, enough to leave a trail if someone knew where to look. Cerberus Initiative. Cross-border interdiction support. Advanced scent retention conditioning. Handler fatality report sealed under federal review. Nathan stared at one line longer than the others. Status of Unit Vesper, unrecovered. His stomach tightened. Across the room, the Doberman rested with his head low against folded blankets, though Nathan noticed the dog was not truly asleep. Every few minutes one amber eye opened toward the windows before closing again. Waiting. Listening. The kind of vigilance that exhaustion could not erase. Dr. Claire Beaumont stepped quietly from her office carrying another cup of coffee. "You have that look," she said softly. Nathan glanced up tiredly. "What look?" "The one officers get when they realize the paperwork matters less than the people involved." She handed him the coffee and sat beside the counter. Steam curled upward between them. Nathan rubbed his jaw slowly. 12 years ago there was a handler named Liam Harlow. Good officer by every account. Then suddenly his entire unit disappeared from circulation after an operation near the Manitoba border. Claire listened carefully. Snow whispered against the clinic windows. Officially it was called restructuring, Nathan continued. Unofficially? Nobody would talk about it after. Before Claire could answer, Vesper's head lifted sharply from across the room. The change was instant. Every muscle tightened beneath the blankets. Nathan turned toward the front lobby just as headlights swept silently across the frosted windows again. The same dark sport utility vehicle. This time it stopped. The engine idled outside beneath the snowfall. Neither Nathan nor Claire spoke. Vesper slowly rose despite his injured leg, placing himself between Nathan and the lobby entrance with eerie precision. Not panic. Protection. Nathan stood carefully, one hand lowering near his radio. The clinic bell chimed softly a few seconds later as the front door opened. Cold air rolled into the lobby carrying snow and the scent of diesel fuel. A man stepped inside wearing a charcoal winter coat dusted with frost. Mid-50s. Tall. Clean-shaven. Calm in the unsettling way experienced officers sometimes become after years around danger. His pale blue eyes moved briefly across the room before settling directly on Vesper. The Doberman emitted a low controlled growl deep in his chest. Not loud. Worse than loud. Recognition. The man stopped several meters away and removed his gloves slowly. That dog requires federal transfer, he said evenly. Immediately. Nathan did not move. And you are? The man reached calmly into his coat pocket. Claire stiffened slightly beside the counter. But he only produced a leather identification wallet. Federal Public Safety Liaison Office. Daniel Sloan. Nathan studied the identification carefully without lowering his guard. Something about the badge looked too clean. Too prepared. Sloan's eyes returned to Vesper again. He is part of a restricted operational program, he continued. You are not authorized to interfere. Vesper stepped slightly forward. The growl deepened. Nathan noticed something then that made his pulse slow dangerously. The Doberman was not reacting to Sloane's voice. He was reacting to his scent. Nathan had worked K9 scenes long enough to recognize target fixation. Vesper remembered this man. Sloane noticed it too. For the first time his calm expression shifted almost invisibly. Officer Mercer, he said carefully, that animal is unstable. Nathan glanced down briefly at Vesper standing protectively beside him despite pain and exhaustion. The Doberman never took his eyes off Sloane. Not fear. Not aggression. Judgment. Nathan looked back at the man standing beneath the fluorescent lobby lights while snow drifted quietly beyond the glass doors. Funny, Nathan said softly. He seemed perfectly calm until you walked in. The room fell silent except for the hum of heating vents overhead. Then Vesper did something that chilled Nathan far more than the storm outside. The Doberman shifted his body sideways slightly and positioned himself to block Sloane's direct path to the hallway behind them. Like he already knew exactly how dangerous this man could be. The snowstorm thickened toward dawn, turning the streets outside the clinic into pale rivers of drifting white beneath the sodium lights of Thunder Bay. Inside, nobody moved for several long seconds after Daniel Sloan spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead while wet snow melted from the man's polished boots onto the lobby floor. Nathan Mercer had spent enough years around interrogations to recognize rehearsed calm when he heard it. Sloan sounded like a man who expected compliance because he had rarely been denied before. But Vesper was not reacting like an unstable animal. The Doberman stood rigid beside Nathan with his injured leg barely supporting his weight, every instinct focused entirely on the stranger near the entrance. Nathan noticed something else too. Vesper never barked. Real fear often barked. Real memory watched silently. Claire Beaumont folded her arms near the reception desk, unease visible across her face. Federal transfer orders for an injured dog in the middle of a snowstorm, she asked carefully. That seems unusually urgent. Sloane's eyes shifted briefly toward her before returning to Nathan. Certain operational assets cannot remain public, he replied evenly. Nathan almost smiled at the wording. Assets. Not officer. Not K9. Not partner. Asset. That single word told him more than the badge ever could. Outside, wind pushed snow hard against the clinic windows. Somewhere in the distance a snowplow groaned down the empty street. Nathan stepped slightly forward, placing himself naturally between Sloane and the Doberman. You said operational program, Nathan said quietly. Which program? Sloane hesitated. Only for a second. But Nathan caught it. Classified. Nathan nodded slowly. Convenient. Vesper's growl deepened the moment Sloane shifted his right hand toward his coat pocket again. Nathan's muscles tightened instantly. But the man only removed a folded document envelope this time and placed it calmly on the counter near Claire. "Transfer authorization," he said. Claire glanced at the paperwork but did not touch it. Nathan remained still. Something colder than suspicion had settled into his chest now. Instinct. The kind that keeps officers alive. Then Vesper did something unexpected. The Doberman stepped away from Nathan and limped slowly toward the hallway leading deeper into the clinic. Not retreating. Leading. He stopped once near the corner and looked back directly at Nathan before continuing again. Nathan frowned slightly. "What is it?" The dog moved another few meters and stopped beside a steel supply cabinet near the rear examination area. Claire looked confused. Maybe he wants to lie down again. But Nathan noticed the posture immediately. Intentional focus. Search behavior. Vesper lowered his nose near the base of the cabinet and nudged once against the metal door before looking back again. Nathan crossed the hallway slowly and opened the cabinet. Cleaning supplies. Medical gauze. Extra blankets. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then he noticed a narrow maintenance panel partially hidden behind stacked supply boxes near the back wall. Dust covered most of the surface except for one faint smear as though something had recently been moved. Nathan crouched and pulled the panel aside carefully. Behind it sat a small weatherproof storage pouch taped beneath exposed piping. Claire inhaled softly. What on earth? Nathan removed the pouch slowly while Sloane remained motionless near the lobby entrance. Too motionless. The kind of stillness people use when trying not to reveal panic. Inside the pouch sat a flash drive wrapped in old plastic and a faded photograph creased from water damage. Nathan unfolded the photograph carefully beneath the fluorescent light. Four officers stood beside a black tactical transport vehicle somewhere deep in northern forest country. Snow. Pines. Heavy winter gear. One of the men was younger. Nathan immediately recognized Corporal Liam Harlow. Beside him sat a lean Doberman with alert amber eyes and a tactical harness marked with a triangular insignia. Cerberus. Nathan's stomach tightened further when he noticed another face standing near the edge of the photograph. Older now. Thinner hair perhaps. But unmistakable. Daniel Sloane. The room fell silent except for the whisper of wind outside. Nathan slowly lifted his eyes toward the man near the clinic entrance. Sloane's calm expression finally cracked almost invisibly around the edges. And beside Nathan, Vesper released a low sound that no longer resembled warning. It sounded like grief. The wind howled harder outside the clinic as dawn crept slowly over Thunder Bay, turning the snow-covered streets pale blue beneath the first traces of morning light. Inside the treatment room, nobody spoke for several long seconds after Nathan found the photograph. The faded image rested in his gloved hand while Vesper remained beside him, amber eyes fixed on Daniel Sloane with the kind of recognition that only comes from memory burned deep into instinct. Not all memories live in words. Some survive in scent. In fear. In grief. Sloane finally stepped forward carefully, his polished boots whispering against the tile floor. "You do not understand what you are looking at," he said quietly. Nathan lifted his eyes toward him. "Then explain it." Sloane's face remained controlled, but something colder had entered his expression now. Fatigue perhaps. Or regret buried too long to hide completely. Claire Beaumont stood silently near the counter, watching both men while snow rattled softly against the clinic windows behind them. Sloane glanced briefly toward Vesper before speaking again. Cerberus was never meant to exist publicly. It was developed after several cross-border trafficking operations failed because human informants kept disappearing. Nathan said nothing. Sloane continued carefully. The dogs were trained for scent-linked memory retention. They could identify handlers, suspects, locations, even operational materials years later. Nathan looked down briefly at the Doberman beside him. Living evidence, he said quietly. Sloane nodded once. Exactly. The room felt colder suddenly despite the humming heaters overhead. Nathan studied the photograph again. Liam Harlow stood smiling faintly beside Vesper in the old winter image, one gloved hand resting against the dog's shoulder. The kind of expression officers only wear around partners they trust completely. Nathan noticed something else in the background now. A shipping container partially visible behind the tactical vehicle. A symbol painted near its side. The same triangular Cerberus insignia. What happened to Harlow? Nathan asked softly. Sloane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The operation went wrong. Nathan looked up sharply. That is not an answer. Vesper emitted another low sound near Nathan's leg. Not aggressive. Uneasy. The Doberman's eyes never left Sloane for even a second. Then Nathan remembered the flash drive still resting inside the weatherproof pouch. He reached for it slowly while Sloane immediately stepped forward. Do not plug that into anything connected to police systems, he said firmly. Nathan paused. There it was again. Fear. Real fear this time. Claire noticed it too. What is on the drive? She asked quietly. Sloane exhaled slowly through his nose, as though deciding how much truth remained worth protecting. Proof, he said at last. Enough to destroy careers. Enough to expose operations that were buried years ago. Nathan stared at him carefully. Buried by who? Sloane looked away toward the snow-covered parking lot outside. Morning light drifted pale across the clinic glass. People who believed national security mattered more than accountability. Nathan felt anger move quietly through his chest now. Not loud anger. The dangerous kind that arrives slowly. And Liam Harlow? Sloane remained silent for several seconds too long. That silence answered enough. Vesper suddenly rose despite the pain in his injured leg and moved closer to Nathan's side. Protective again. Nathan placed one hand gently against the Doberman's neck, feeling the tremble beneath short black fur. Not weakness. Trauma. The kind that never fully leaves living things. Then the clinic computer near the reception desk emitted a soft notification tone. Claire frowned and walked toward the monitor. Her expression changed almost immediately. Nathan, she whispered carefully. Someone accessed our patient records remotely 10 minutes ago. Nathan turned sharply. From where? Claire swallowed once. Federal network authorization. Sloane closed his eyes briefly like a man watching consequences arrive exactly as expected. They found him, he said quietly. Outside, another vehicle turned slowly into the snow-covered parking lot. Then another behind it. Dark sport utility vehicles moving silently through falling snow beneath the dim northern dawn. Vesper stepped directly in front of Nathan again, body rigid despite exhaustion. Nathan stared through the frosted clinic windows as black figures began emerging from the vehicles outside. No flashing lights. No visible markings. Just disciplined movement through the storm. And beside him, the Doberman who had once been erased from the world lowered his head slightly and released the quietest sound Nathan had heard all night. Not fear this time. Readiness. The first thing Nathan Mercer noticed was how quiet the men outside moved through the snow. No shouting. No sirens. Just dark winter jackets crossing the parking lot beneath the dim dawn sky while snow curled around their boots in pale waves. Professional. Controlled. The kind of movement designed to avoid witnesses. Inside the clinic, Vesper stood braced in front of Nathan despite his injured leg trembling beneath him. The Doberman's amber eyes never left the figures approaching through the storm. Daniel Sloane remained near the reception desk with both hands visible now, though the tension around his jaw had hardened. They are not here for an arrest, he said quietly. Nathan glanced toward him sharply. Then what are they here for? Sloane's answer came almost as a whisper. Containment. Outside, one of the men stopped near the clinic entrance and pressed a gloved hand against an earpiece. Another moved toward the rear alley beside the building. Nathan felt his pulse settle into the cold focused rhythm that comes before danger. He had experienced it during armed standoffs, highway rescues, blizzard searches. The body learns silence before fear arrives. Claire Beaumont locked the front reception door with shaking hands. "Nathan," she whispered. "What do we do?" Before he could answer, Vesper suddenly turned away from the windows and limped quickly down the rear hallway deeper into the clinic. Nathan frowned. Where is he going? The Doberman stopped near the emergency supply exit leading toward the back loading lane. Then he looked directly at Nathan again. Waiting. Nathan understood immediately. Not panic. Escape route. Tactical repositioning. Sloane noticed too. A strange sadness crossed his face. He still remembers extraction drills, he murmured softly. Nathan moved toward the hallway. You are coming with us, he said firmly to Claire and Sloane both. Claire grabbed her winter coat from the wall while Sloane hesitated only briefly before following. The snow outside the rear exit struck Nathan's face hard the moment they stepped into the alley behind the clinic. Dawn remained weak beneath heavy clouds rolling across Lake Superior. Wind carried ice crystals through the narrow lane while distant engines idled somewhere beyond the buildings. Vesper moved ahead despite his injury, nose low, leading them through the drifting snow toward an older maintenance road running behind the industrial district. Nathan kept one hand near his sidearm while scanning rooftops and intersections. Where are we going? Claire asked breathlessly. Nathan looked toward Vesper. I think he already knows. The Doberman continued forward another 30 meters before stopping beside a chain-link fence partially buried beneath snowdrifts. Beyond it sat an abandoned freight depot near the frozen rail lines at the edge of the harbor. Rusted shipping containers stood silent beneath layers of frost and blowing snow. Vesper stared directly toward the farthest warehouse building. Nathan's stomach tightened. Memory. The dog was tracking memory. Sloane stopped beside him slowly. This place, his voice faded. Nathan looked sharply toward him. You know it. Sloane stared toward the warehouse with pale exhausted eyes. The final Cerberus operation happened here 11 years ago. Snow hissed across the frozen pavement around them. Claire looked between the two men. What happened? Sloane swallowed once before answering. Liam Harlow discovered officers inside the operation were selling protected trafficking routes to criminal networks crossing the border. Nathan felt cold move deeper into his chest. Corruption. Sloane nodded faintly. Harlow intended to expose everyone involved. His eyes lowered toward Vesper standing silently near the fence. But somebody betrayed the unit first. Wind groaned through loose metal panels somewhere above the depot yard. Nathan looked toward the warehouse again, dark and silent against the snowfall. And Liam? Sloane's face tightened with regret that no longer looked rehearsed. He never made it out. Beside them Vesper suddenly stiffened. Every muscle locked. His ears lifted toward the warehouse entrance ahead. Nathan followed the dog's gaze just as movement appeared through the drifting snow near the loading doors. 3 dark figures emerging slowly from the shadows of the depot. Waiting. Watching. One of them stepped slightly forward beneath the pale dawn light. Older. Broad shoulders beneath a black winter coat. Calm posture. The man removed his gloves carefully and looked directly at Nathan. Then his eyes shifted toward Vesper. I was wondering when the dog would finally come home. Snow swirled through the abandoned freight yard like pale smoke beneath the weak dawn light. The frozen harbor beyond the rail lines groaned softly under shifting ice while wind rattled loose chains against rusted cargo containers. Nathan Mercer stood beside Vesper near the fence line, one hand resting near his holstered sidearm as the older man approached slowly across the snow-covered pavement. The two silent figures behind him remained several meters back near the warehouse entrance, watching without speaking. Daniel Sloane lowered his eyes the moment he recognized the man. Graham. The older man stopped walking. His expression barely changed. You always were sentimental, Daniel. His voice carried the calm weight of authority polished over decades. Commissioner Graham Vale. Former Director of Tactical Coordination for Northern Border Operations. Nathan knew the name immediately. Respected. Decorated. Untouchable. Vale's gaze drifted toward Vesper standing rigid beside Nathan. Remarkable animal, he said softly. Even after all these years. Vesper emitted a low sound deep in his chest, not loud enough to echo through the yard, but enough to make the hair along Nathan's neck rise. Vale noticed it and sighed faintly. Still remembers me too. Snow collected slowly on the shoulders of his black winter coat. Nathan stepped slightly forward. Liam Harlow found out what was happening here, did not he? Vale looked toward the frozen rail yard behind them. Harlow was an idealist. Dangerous kind of man in intelligence work. Nathan's jaw tightened. He was murdered. Vale's silence answered enough. Claire Beaumont stood near the fence behind Nathan, pale from cold and shock both. Sloane finally spoke quietly. You told us Cerberus would protect people. Vale turned toward him with tired eyes. And it did. For years. Wind swept snow between them. The commissioner's voice remained calm, almost sorrowful now. You have no idea. How many trafficking routes we dismantled. How many children crossed borders safely because those dogs could identify what human witnesses could not. Nathan stared at him coldly. That does not excuse betrayal. Vale looked back toward Vesper. No, he admitted quietly. It does not. For several long seconds the only sound came from the distant creak of frozen metal shifting in the harbor wind. Then Vale slowly reached inside his coat. Nathan immediately tensed. So did the two men near the warehouse. But Vale only removed a weathered leather dog collar worn pale with age. Vesper stiffened instantly at the sight of it. Nathan looked down at the Doberman in surprise. The dog's breathing had changed completely. Not fear. Recognition. Vale held the collar carefully in both hands. This belonged to Liam, he said softly. He kept it off during operations because Vesper moved quieter without tags. Snow gathered silently along the leather edges. Vale's expression seemed older suddenly. Tired in a way that power never fixes. The night Harlow died, this dog tried to drag him out of the warehouse through 6 inches of snow while gunfire echoed across the rail yard. Nathan remained silent. Vale swallowed once before continuing. Afterward, they ordered me to terminate the surviving unit and erase Cerberus completely. His eyes lowered toward Vesper again. I could not do it. Sloane stared at him carefully. So you let the dog escape? Vale nodded faintly. I hoped memory would die with time. Vesper stepped forward slowly through the snow now, injured leg trembling beneath him. Nathan did not stop him. Neither did Vale. The old commissioner crouched carefully as the Doberman approached within arm's reach. For one suspended moment nobody moved in the frozen freight yard. Then Vesper lowered his head quietly against the man's hand. Not forgiveness exactly. Something gentler. Recognition of grief. Vale closed his eyes briefly. Good dog, he whispered. Still loyal after everything. Nathan watched the scene in silence while dawn finally broke properly across Thunder Bay, pale sunlight touching the frozen harbor beyond the depot. The storm had begun to ease. Somewhere nearby gulls cried softly over the lake. Vale slowly removed Liam Harlow's old collar from his hands and passed it toward Nathan. Take care of him, he said quietly. Nathan accepted the collar without speaking. Vesper moved back beside him moments later and leaned lightly against his leg for the first time since they met. Not tactical positioning now. Trust. Months later, after the investigations ended and the sealed files finally surfaced, Nathan would leave active highway patrol behind. He purchased a small cabin north of Thunder Bay near the edge of the forest where retired working dogs could heal quietly away from sirens and cold concrete floors. On winter mornings, snow still drifted softly across the porch while pine smoke curled into the pale Canadian sky. And almost every sunrise, a black and rust-colored Doberman could be seen lying peacefully beside the cabin window, no longer guarding exits, no longer waiting for danger to return. Just resting at last beside the man who finally understood that some evidence does not belong buried in files. Some evidence breathes. And sometimes, after years of silence, loyalty still finds its way home.